And, wow, just perfect tonight to have joining with us right now. I'm just going to bring her in right now into the studio with us, Amy Peikoff, who is joining us from parlor.com. Awesome to have you. Welcome.
Thanks for having me, Jay. How are you?
I am super, super. How about yourself?
I'm doing okay here. We are back online again. Actually, we've rebooted twice since Amazon took us down in January. The first took several weeks, and then we have built up an entirely new code base recently. And
Oh,
so we
wow.
ended up having another reboot a couple weeks ago, and we're in the business now, right now, every day, just shoring up this new code base, and it's going to be scalable in a way that the prior code base was not. And we're looking forward to, after a very rough beginning of this year, a pretty bright future at Parler, which I'm glad
Well,
to
that
talk about as
sounds
well here today. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds very optimistic and great. Typically when we start our interviews off, just to kind of get the audience to know you a little bit, there's the French philosopher Bernard Pivot, and he had famous 10 questions that he would ask everybody. And, we're a nonprofit, so we can't afford to do all 10. So we can only afford to do four and a half of them. Right. So I'm going to
Okay.
ask four and a half questions. The half question, don't let it trip you up. Just do the best you can with it. But Star Trek or Star Wars?
Star Wars.
Good answer. What is your favorite number?
8.
That's a great number. I like it. What profession other than yours would you like to attempt?
Coding.
Coding. All right.
I've
It's
been
not what it's
wishing I
cracked
could
up to be. No,
code
I'm just joking.
lately. At Parler, I wish I could be more help on that side of things. Yes.
That's exciting. No, it's a good answer. It's a good answer. What is your favorite flavor?
Chocolate.
Ah, great answer. Great answer. Now, this is a half a question. We run out of budget halfway through. So, who would you like to? And that's where the question ends. So,
Could I
just who
have
would you
coffee?
like to?
How about coffee with Ayn Rand? Can we do that? I
Oh,
never
I
did meet
like
her,
it.
and that would be fun.
That is awesome. Amy Peikoff, UCLA and USC. So maybe you're a little conflicted when football season comes around. I don't know how you manage that. UCLA School of Law, USC PhD, talk show host for two different shows, founder and president of the Center for Legalization of Privacy.
Oh, so you dig that up too? That's okay.
Love it. I know, I
Yeah.
love it. It was awesome, of course. And now, Chief Policy Officer for Parler. So, wow, resume reads like a black belt in charge of privacy and law.
Well, or it's this meandering thing where I actually found where I was supposed to be finally, right? So I see it that way. But yeah,
Oh, that's
the
awesome.
legal set, the Center for Legalization of Privacy was really the thing because the reason that that was founded was to get involved in United States versus Facebook.
Mm.
And in that case, there's this consent decree between the FTC and Facebook, under which I argue that the FTC and the DOJ arguably have warrantless access to Facebook user data. So that's what I was doing immediately before joining Parler. That's how I came to the attention of a strategic investor in Parler.
Yeah, there's some good people and some questionable people in that whole e-discovery world. There's some legitimate companies, and then there's some companies you scratch your head and go, "Wow." And I think folks would be shocked at how much information is pulled by paying for it off of through these APIs from various platforms. They would be totally shocked. Our first question to you tonight, though, is it parlay or parlor?
So there has been a little bit of a revival because, as you may have read in the media, our founding investor, Rebecca Mercer, is getting more involved again after, unfortunately, they had to let the former CEO, John Mates, go. And it was Rebecca Mercer, actually, who named the platform, actually, her son, Parlay. It was Parlay originally. And then, as you were saying in your little film in the intro there, a lot of people around here just pronounce it parlor. And perhaps if we want to even reboot the pronunciation, we might be asking too much of Americans to say it parlay. So I would give people a choice at this point.
There you go. Yeah, whatever works. I think in the South we say if it's grits that fits, swing with it. So yeah. Jordan Peterson is a college professor from Canada. He's much in the news and he's somewhat controversial, but he had an interesting quote recently I wanted to throw at you. He said that he hates to argue any position from the middle, because you ultimately become the bane of existence for the extremes on both sides, and they both see you as the extreme opposite, right? Is parlay falling into that trap of of being thought of as one extreme or the other instead of just middle?
So the interesting thing is that we are neutral. So we are viewpoint neutral. And being viewpoint neutral these days and encouraging people just to think for themselves as opposed to obey an authority, whether it's the platform itself or, as we've seen with the recent news with Facebook, Facebook is choosing some other level of oversight or another authority to appeal to. At Parler, we believe that with respect to any content that is legal, the individual user should be the one to decide whether it's going to end up in his or her feed, and that you should think about this stuff critically, that other people should not be doing your thinking for you. And so we're radical in that sense. And I would say that some people on either side of the so-called aisle, the left or the right, might not be completely happy with our position, because there are some people on the right even who think that there should be, say, a right-wing platform. But really, we are viewpoint neutral. And given the dominance of the left wing in social media today, that ends up putting us really more opposed to them. But yeah, I would say also, perhaps with the focus on user privacy as well. If you are very extreme for user privacy, for instance, I am opposed to the so-called third-party doctrine that allows the government warrantless access to data. But there are many people on the right who would disagree with me about that personally. So I don't know that it's center so much, but it's just taking a series of positions that are very principled, and then you'll end up, finding disagreement all over the place.
Well, that's true. I can't think. By the way, one of our founders has said that we get too binary in our viewpoints on everything in the United States. That you don't have to look through a prism of your political views upon everything that you gaze. Sometimes you just need to back up and kind of take a breath and say, how do I feel about this topic in general? And it's interesting you should bring up having a right or right wing platform somewhere. Maybe that's needed or warranted. But recently I talked to a gentleman online, and he was saying that folks that showed up at Parler just showed up at the wrong party, and they should go to any other competitor. And I was like, well, the whole story here is that this was a growing competitor that was crushed.
Right.
Thrown out of AWS. So I think it's disingenuous for people to say just go to a competitor. So I feel kind of sorry for anybody that starts up right now to compete with this stuff.
No, and I think the message is that any kind of viable competitor that had been in that place at that time, where Twitter had just booted off President Trump, and he had been rumored to be coming over to us. We happen to be the one, right? But it could have been somebody else. It just so happened, coincidentally, I don't know if you knew this, but AWS had signed a big contract with Twitter a few weeks before we were kicked off. So this constellation of factors, those somehow wound up in us getting booted with about 48 hours notice.
Wow. Yeah, that we're going to mention that in our newscast in a little bit. This was something that was really recently kind of unearthed. It was reported on, but not widely back when it happened. But you're absolutely right. Twitter signed an agreement towards the end of 2020, and then ironically or coincidentally or incredible, you guys were ousted. a mere handful of weeks later, and your
Actually,
Twitter's
10
probably the biggest
days.
competitor. 10
January 10th.
days.
January 10th. Yeah.
Wow. And you said how long of a warning did you have when you were ousted, when you were
We
unplugged?
received the email on the 8th, which was the Friday. And then by midnight on the 10th is when they turned everything off.
We're going to show a segment later where I was discussing this with a bunch of people around the world on a show called World Edition, and they were unaware of it. And one of the people were saying, well, you could just go through the browser. And I said, try right now. So on the air, he tried, and he shows the 404 error on the screen, which I think is just a great thing. The viewers, you guys are going to love it. So you guys really see yourselves as a town square. You're not really taking sides on this thing. You're just giving the platform for people to voice. How many people are on Parlay roughly? What size audience is it?
So now it's somewhat diminished because we have been, again, we rebooted and we've rebooted now a couple times, and we have not yet been going out and doing the big push for trying to bring everybody back. But as far as I know, we had well over 11 million domestic accounts as of the time that we were taken down, and we had some millions of foreign as well, but mostly domestic accounts. And so as we go through the process of letting people know that we're back and that we have improved technology, actually, it turns out it's been a struggle. It's been a long struggle here, a lot of work, but not only, do we have an independent stack, which, that was one of the things that, we were going to talk about, which is, Amazon, and you mentioned it in your little video. That was a great video, by the way. But you talked about the fact that a cloud service like Amazon is more than happy to make you dependent on all of the services that they provide. So when Amazon just, ripped the cloud right out from under us, it was not only that, but there were a series of different services, a bunch of different services that were tied to that. And so we had to rebuild that whole stack. And then in addition, as I said, we've made the extra election to rebuild the whole code base so that we're going to be even more solid going into the future.
Yeah, by the way, we have an interview coming up with Alan Neekum later in this show. He's a CTO that was getting deeply involved with AWS when you guys got pulled in January, and it caused him and his team to freeze in their tracks. They backpedaled a little bit, and then they started looking for, okay, how do we turn the 6 weeks, I guess you guys were down roughly, into 6 seconds? How can we do that? So he actually wrote a white paper
Oh,
documenting
wow.
as they were going through, saying, here's what every CTO in the world needs to know about that. So folks, stick around for the second half. You're going to love the interview with Alan on that. So we've kind of hedged around it. We've talked about it, but just to pull the whole moose out on the table, what happened in the second week of January for the folks that don't know?
So we had gotten an email from Amazon and then both also from Apple on the same day saying it's come to our attention that there's all of this violent content on your platform, and you need to show us within X time, whether it be 24, 48 hours, that you can handle all of this content appropriately. Otherwise, we're going to pull you down. And this came out of the blue. In particular with Amazon, it was notable because there had been an email exchange a day or two before it was an exchange that had finished the day before on the Thursday, where the Amazon representative had written back and said, oh, we consider this resolved. And then the next day you get this email saying you're going to be taken down. So there was definitely not good communication within Amazon. The thing that's notable though, right? So there's this content, right? There's this violent and inciting content. Nobody disagrees about the merit of this content. It has no merit. It doesn't have any place in a discussion that is substantive or productive about any issue. That content has always violated Parler's guidelines. It violates, of course, the guidelines of other platforms as well. But what we learned in the weeks after, remember the 6th of January, what we learned in the weeks after was that this content was not only on Parler, it was everywhere. And in
No, no,
particular, there were studies about how much of it was on Facebook, and that there was planning going on in the groups on Facebook. We don't have groups on Parler. Parler was not a great place to plan, to get together with people the way that Facebook was. Parler was unfairly singled out for this. And I think in part because it was reputed to have the conservatives. Of course, there are predominantly a lot of conservative people because they've been kicked off or mistreated on other platforms. But the fact that you have a lot of conservatives on your platform doesn't mean you have a lot of people who planned any sort of violent activities around the 6th. Those people were all over the internet. In fact, Ashley Babbitt, who was the woman who was killed on the Capitol on the 6th of January, she had a Parler account, but she wasn't active on it. In fact, she was active on Twitter up to the last day of her life. So you find that this content was everywhere, and Kill Mike Pence was trending on Twitter the weekend that we were taken down. Parler, the facts show, was unfairly singled out.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, and I'm going to give a shout out to Rex Lee of Cyber Talk. He's an investigative reporter on these types of subjects, and he actually found a CNN report you might be interested in. I think he took a screenshot of it before it was taken down, where they cited that it was only 1 or 2 people on Parler that were saying these things, and they tracked like 219,000 people on Twitter that were saying exactly the same thing. So it was an amazing
the
report.
quantitative studies are a little bit tricky, right? Because you talk about Parler is a relatively smaller platform, and then Twitter is a bit bigger, and then Facebook is quite a bit bigger. So the thing that is clear, though, is that this content was everywhere, that Facebook and Twitter, with all the resources that they had at their disposal, still could not control this content around the weeks leading up to the 6th. And the other thing that had come out in the weeks following the 10th of January, when we were deplatformed, was the fact that in the weeks leading up to the 6th, Parler had been working with law enforcement with respect to some of this content. So, you take a public post. These are posts publicly, that could be shared with law enforcement. And at Parler, we had shared some of those with law enforcement in the weeks leading up to the 6th, in fact, cooperating. And so the idea that Parler was somehow responsible for the events of the 6th due to user-generated content on the platform is just ridiculous.
Yeah, and you'll see some attorneys' takes later on in the show. They agree with you. It was absolutely absurd. It was, in my opinion, antitrust. And there's a lot of issues here. Let me ask you one last question, because we only got, and I wish I had all night to talk to you about this stuff.
Another time, right?
Yeah, I hope that would be fantastic. If you had a time machine and you could go back in time to tell yourself, hey, these are the things you need to prepare for in 2021, what would they be?
I would say the biggest thing, if you are trying to do something like what Parler is doing, and again, it doesn't seem like it should be that controversial, that we respect user privacy. This is something that we hadn't talked too much about, but we are very much privacy conscious in setting up every aspect of what we do at Parler. We don't data mine. We treat people as human beings and not as commodities. And then in addition, to encourage them to think for themselves and to be viewpoint neutral. This shouldn't be so controversial, but today it is. And so when you know that it is, what you need to do is have a resilient stack where you have duplicates of everything ready to go in case something like this happens to you. So have redundancies built in. That's the biggest lesson.
Great advice. More on that in the second half of the show with Alan, too. So everybody make sure to stick around. Amy Peikoff, it's been a delight. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks for inviting me. Have a good night.